this clock is ticking, right? And in 9 months, the government is gonna start collecting aggressively on these student loans, right? Possibly garnishing your wages, even possibly garnishing Social Security. A garnishing of the wages, let's explain that so these people understand the severity of this because it could be coming for them.
The term of art, as us lawyers like to talk about, is a distinction between being delinquent, which is when you're more than 90 days behind, and that's where you can start having some consequences, and then when you are in default. And default is when you're more than 270 days without a payment on your student loan. And once you fall into default, that's when the really bad stuff happens. They can bring lawsuits against you and things like that. But in general, for most borrowers, they don't bring lawsuits. They just send you a notice that in 30 days, they're going to start an administrative wage garnishment. And that's true. This is true across the country. Many states, like where I am in North Carolina, most creditors don't have access to wage garnishment. I think there's like 14 states that don't have very robust wage garnishment. But this is federal law, and they're able to garnish anyone's wages anywhere in the United States. And they can take up to 25% of your paycheck.
I mean,
Simply by
25%, like 25%. Think about that. Like,
they'll send you a letter and then your boss a letter, and then a quarter of your paycheck is gone.
and
And
not only is your paycheck gone, but the boss knows, right? Everyone comes to us with that and they're like, "Will anyone know about bankruptcy? Will anyone know about, like, me hiring you?" Well, let me tell you, this is how they find out, right?
right, this is how they find out. And the thing that I always have to explain that people, I think they get when they hear it out loud, is the difference is, and you can, and I've explained this to dozens of employers before, is that the difference is if your wages are being garnished, that says you have a debt problem, and your boss is being forced to help fix that, but slowly and painfully. Where if you file bankruptcy, you had a debt problem, past tense,
Yeah.
and you found a solution to it. Is it the ideal one? It might be, but I know this particularly from dealing with the Department of Defense/War, right? Is that the government prefers people to file bankruptcy than to be sunk in debt. You know why? Because if you discharge your debts or put them under control in bankruptcy, the Russians can't bribe you the same way, right? You're not a security risk, is what it
Yeah.
comes down to.
Yeah.
So
Well, and not only that, you can rebuild your life, right? I mean, we've seen people, your clients, my clients, they file bankruptcy and they're buying new cars, they're buying a home in a year or 2 years. It's shocking how people can rebuild their life by understanding it, right? But there's such a stigma to bankruptcy. This whole conversation of, well, I borrowed the money and I shouldn't have bought this and shouldn't have bought that. It's like, okay, great. Creditors are charging you 29.99%. Let's talk about what's moral and what's not, right?
right,
So
and I understand why the creditors discourage people from filing bankruptcy because they're the ones who take it in the shins, right? What's often frustrating is that there are a lot of consumer-facing organizations that work to help rebuild people's credit that also are like, "Oh, don't bankruptcy, that should always be the last choice."
yeah, right.
I don't know if I disagree with that, but last doesn't mean the choice that you make in desperation when the gun is to your head. It's a choice that you should make earlier. So, especially and I think this is also true when it comes to student loans, is that people wait too long to talk to a bankruptcy lawyer, and they assume that bankruptcy can do nothing for my student loans. Well, at a minimum, a bankruptcy can stop wage garnishment for as long as 5 years. It can stop it can put you back in control. You might not have to pay anything for that 5-year period of time, right? Or just what you can afford during that 5-year period of time. And you're the one who has control rather than being subject to this brute force calculation by the government. Hopefully, it gets rid of all these other debts. And in many cases, we found going on 3 years now, this November, is people are still able to discharge their student loans, whether even under the current administration. The government is still agreeing to student loan discharges on a fairly streamlined, it's not simple, but it's much easier than it used to be, process where you can go in having a pretty good idea that you may be able to get your student loans discharged in bankruptcy. And it's frustrating to me that a lot of these consumer protection organizations aren't always talking to people about the how bankruptcy is still a very powerful tool for you, because it's hard. And the unfortunate truth is that I have bills to pay myself, so I have to charge people, so I'm not free, which is
Of course. Well, let's
hard.
unpack that. Let's unpack that for a little bit. So you have a debtor or a client who has student loans and they're behind, and they're all of a sudden, let's just pretend they get their wage garnishment or they're worried about it. Like the first step is to understand your options. Like, right? You don't just because you talk to either a bankruptcy attorney or some type of attorney about this, it doesn't mean you're signing up, right?
Correct.
And you can go to the link below and get connected to attorneys in every state, right? In our network who understand debt, they understand student loans, and the first option, like you said, is bankruptcy can stop a garnishment. So 25% of your income is back in your pocket and not the government's pocket. That's the first thing. And if you can't afford your student loan payment, there's no way you can afford a garnishment because your
Right.
student loan payment's not 25% of
Correct.
your income,
Yeah.
right? So think about it from that perspective. Second of all, there's something called a student loan adversary. We've talked about this before, and you've done many of them. We have attorneys done many, many, like hundreds around the country, where you actually find out if bankruptcy can discharge. And that means like the same way a bankruptcy would get rid of a credit card or a payday loan, it actually
Right.
eliminates the student loans forever. And there's a series of criterias that you have to qualify for, but your attorney will know this, right? And that's a viable option that you're dealing with all the time, Ed, right?
Yeah, and you go through and you look at, the real criteria. I boil it down to past, present, and future. You look at, what did the borrower do in the past? Where are their expenses and income presently, and what's their future look like? And with but with an analysis of those that can be done very efficiently and cost effectively, you can say to somebody, all right, your bankruptcy may be able to get rid of your student loans. And in the first 2 years of this program, we're into the third. 85% of the people who brought these student loan adversary proceedings successfully discharged their student loans, which
85%. I mean, that's a monster number.
that's a number that's worth the gamble, right? And, this is not saying, oh, you got, people buy scratch off tickets for far worse odds for a much lower payoff a lot of times.
Yeah, by far, by far. Okay, so this is public student loans. So these are like federal student loans. Let's talk private. Okay. So, when you have a private student loan, this is not government based. Now,
Right.
they're not going to be able to garnish their wages the same way the federal government can, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
That depends on your state. They had to, generally they would have to bring a lawsuit, get a judgment, and then they can garnish your wages depending on where you live and where you took the loans out and where you're all sorts of factors there.
pretend a client, a student loan borrower, gets a private student loan, gets a lawsuit, and they get a judgment from
Mhm.
the student. What's the path here? Same exact thing. Talk to a debt attorney. Understand your options. Can those
And
get
I
discharged? What? That's the
Yeah, talk to me earlier rather than later, right? Because it's all, the earlier you talk to a lawyer, the more options you're going to have and routes to take. Because once they get a judgment against you, if particularly if you own uh, your home, or they may be able to use that judgment lien and take your home away from you, or seize other assets that you have, cars, bank accounts, things like that. Even in states where there isn't wage garnishment, they still have a lot of tools to do that. A bankruptcy can stop that. If timed right, it may be able to, um, you may be able to find other ways to beat those student loans. I don't think it's useful a call like this to go into all the deep
yeah, no,
on
no,
that.
for sure. We're high level. So
Talk to a lawyer to find out where those are.
so let's talk about early. You said, let talk to me early, right? So if I'm a student loan borrower, I'm having a hard time paying the bills, and we know collection started in May of 2025. June, July, August. We're having a hard time. when do they reach out to an attorney and say, "Hey, I want to talk to someone"?
Well, I think once you start, having to, once you start skipping payments a couple in a row, that says to me that this is not just oh, I had a bad month, I was out sick for 2 weeks and didn't get a paycheck. It's a chronic problem. When you start robbing from Peter to pay Paul, right? That's a bad choice, especially when you start not paying student loans to pay credit card bills. That's all, you want to talk, when you can't pay one bill and you use money to pay another, that's what I think you should be talking to a lawyer to help you prioritize which are the most important bills for me to pay, so that you know that it's more important to pay for your house than it is to pay for an old medical bill, kind of.
And the thing is, the attorney can guide you. I mean, once again, we have a link in the notes section where you can get connected to an attorney around the country for free. You're going to talk to someone and get options. It doesn't mean you have to sign up right away. You're going to get options on, hey, what do I do? Where do I go? There's a stigma around bankruptcy that is not always valid, right? I mean, people think bankruptcy is a ball and chain and I'm going to hold it for 10 years and I won't be able to buy a car, buy a home. That's not true, right? I mean, you can,
A car the day after they file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy.
I mean, they do it all the time. I mean, we have people that are buying a different car or buying a home after 1 year during a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, 2 years after a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. I mean, these are people rebuilding their life. And probably asked, why would a creditor lend to someone with a bankruptcy on the credit report? It's because they know they can't file again. They have no
And
debt.
there's a professor out of Illinois law school there who his research is also that 1 out of 10 Americans have filed adults have filed bankruptcy.
Yeah.
I think that also people are always shocked by that statistic. They're like, "Well, I don't know anybody who's filed bankruptcy." I'm like, "No, you don't know that
They they filed.
you know people who have filed bankruptcy."
Yeah.
And they always say to me, "Oh, who do I know?" I'm like, "I'm not going to tell you my client's name,
I know.
but there are people who have filed bankruptcy."
Absolutely.
And why? Because you know, it is this is part of the social safety net that, when that, we've decided that rather than keeping people in debtors prisons, it's better to get them a fresh start. So I think that's
Darn
one
right.
of the
And that goes back thousands of years. I mean, like, biblically, it was forgiving debt every 7 years.
come in early because your your creditors, whether they're the government or private student loans or just credit card, they're not on your side no matter how much honey they talk with. They're really not there for you.